round 2 is pretty good, but round 3 looks absolutely incredible. So we went 6 for 8 last week. Let's see if we can get our first 8 for 8 of the year. That's the last time I picked the Dragons and Eels ever again. Match of the round alert as we get ready for the grand final rematch. The Penrith Panthers, they host the Brisbane Broncos, and I am so excited for this game. Both teams haven't looked great, despite both being at 1-1, but this is going to be so emotional, especially for the Brisbane Broncos. They've had months to think about how they could have won that football game. And for Penrith so far, it's been a week where they couldn't score points, and the next week where they couldn't keep the opposition from scoring points. So I'm very interested to see how this game goes. Fisher Harris will be a huge out for Penrith, so I think that may give the advantage to the Brisbane Broncos, especially in that forward battle. And if they can get that power game going like they did last week against the South Sydney Rabbitohs, and then they just need some moments of brilliances from the likes of Walsh, Staggs, and Cobbo like we saw last week, but they will be without Adam Reynolds. For that reason alone, I am going to tip the Penrith Panthers. I think the Brisbane Broncos know if they show up to this game playing like they did against South Sydney, then no matter how good Penrith are, they are still Penrith. They will still put them to the sword. So I think they're going to be incredibly up for this game. Like I said at the top, they're going to be so emotional for this one, but I still think that Penrith Panthers have enough weapons in the duffel bag. They're at home. They don't like losing at home if you're not against the Parramatta Eels, and they just beat the Parramatta Eels at home. So I'm going to take the Penrith Panthers. I'm going to take them 1-12, and for an anytime try scorer, I think Jock Madden, the likely replacement, will be seeing heaps of traffic, so I think Scotty Sorensen will be scoring his first for 2024. The early game on the Friday, and two teams who will be walking into this game with very different mindsets. The New Zealand Warriors 0 for 2, and in both games you could argue they should be 2-0. The Canberra Raiders sit on top of the ladder after two very impressive wins, so it's a very important game, more so for the New Zealand Warriors. They're back at home and they should be feeling quite confident, but the Canberra Raiders have been so good so far. Granted, it is against oppositions a lot of people have question marks over, but I am going to tip the New Zealand Warriors. I think the value is with the Canberra Raiders, paying nearly $3 head to head. The Canberra Raiders power game, if that is on, there's very few packs who can stop it, but any pack that has Adam Fanua-Blake in it, maybe outside Penrith and Brisbane, I think can match it with any other forward pack in the competition. The Warriors are going to be so desperate. It's going to be a full house there in Christchurch, so I've got the New Zealand Warriors winning. I'm very not confident about this game. This game could be a smoky 4 match of the round, but those were two heartbreaking losses, and that could go either way for the Warriors. That could fire them up, or that could be just so mentally draining and the Canberra Raiders take advantage of it. But I think back in New Zealand, the Warriors should learn from 2 games that they should have won, so I'm going to tip the New Zealand Warriors 1-12. And for an anytime try scorer, I'm going to go with Curdy Capewell. The best rivalry in the NRL, the Sydney Roosters, they're hosting South Sydney Rabbitohs on what should be a chockers Allianz Stadium. The Sydney Roosters and the South Sydney Rabbitohs, both teams looking to rebound after what has been an inconsistent start to the season. The Sydney Roosters having to come off a 5-day turnaround after what was a disappointing performance, but a very physical game up against Manly, while the Rabbitohs have got over a full week to respond. I mean, with these games, they can go either way. I think both teams will be so up for it that they won't be able to play their best. It just sort of depends on who can handle their emotions better. If there's one thing I've learned trying to pick this game in recent years, is that the form line just really does not matter, and the home ground advantage does not matter either. The Roosters did get the double over the Bunnies last year, and the Bunnies, well, we all know the story about them, so there's no point piling on what has already been such a shocking period for them going back to the latter part of last year. And I know that we all have confidence in the South Sydney Rabbitohs turning it around, but I've got to hold them to the same standard as other footy teams. Yes, they get Jack Whiten back. Yes, it looks like Lockie Elias is going to be dropped. But until I see something change on the field, I just don't think it's worth the risk tipping against them at Allianz. So I am going to take the Sydney Roosters. These games, to my knowledge, don't really ever seem to go 13 plus outside that game at the end of last year. So I'm only going to go the Sydney Roosters Roosters 1-12. If I could, I would like to add the caveat that I only tip the Roosters if Raleigh and JWH don't go off or to the sin bin. But hey, that's not how this exactly works. So I'm going to go the Roosters 1-12. And for an anytime try scorer, he was a magician in Vegas and he was kept pretty quiet up against Manly at Brookie, but I am going for Joey Manu. Saturday kicks off with the Bulldogs and the Titans. And while the Titans aren't 0-2, after seeing what happened to the Dragons up against the Dolphins, I have huge questions around them. And the Titans look still to be without some of their key players. Now, the Bulldogs, they were pretty impressive last week considering. However, when you're pretty impressive and still lose 13 plus, it kind of shows where you're at as a club. It is at Belmore, but honestly, after previous seasons, I wouldn't be looking into that too much. I mean, I am going to tip the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs. I think if the Titans show up as the team, which they shouldn't because they've had 2 weeks to think about it, and I think they get Kieran Foran back. But if the Titans don't improve considerably and the Bulldogs can just manage to play like they did last week, then I think the Bulldogs will win, and they're at home, so by default, I am going to tip the Bulldogs. I think whoever wins this wins 13 plus. I think if it's a close game, it'll probably be a very poor game. I just think whichever team can get up for this and execute their game plan better, whichever team superstars, because there is still a few out here, whichever team stars can take advantage, I think they will get their club, they'll win 13 plus. So I am going to take the Doggies in this game, and for an anytime try scorer, I think if you can run the ball a bit more, I think Matty Burton can get there or kick out, but I'm going to pick Matty Burton for the story. The mid game on Saturday, the Dragons, they're hosting the Cowboys, and I think we got a pretty good indicator of where the Dragons are at last week. Now, the Cowboys weren't exactly great either, but they were still able to get the win, so it is good signs for the Cowboys despite their second game not being too impressive. Now, it is in Cogra. That being said, though, the Dragons' home field advantage is sort of like the Bulldogs the past few years. So I'm going to take the Cowboys. The Cowboys' record in Sydney isn't great. And if they get off the plane / bus looking like they did against the Newcastle Knights, and the Dragons have all the makings of pulling off an upset, but it is the Dragons. And I fell into the trap last week, and I'm not going to again, so I'm going to tip the North Queensland Cowboys. I have enough faith in the Dragons for it not to be 13 plus, so I am going to tip the Cowboys 1-12, which may be a mistake, and for an anytime try scorer, I'm going to go Valentine Holmes. Late game on the Saturday, the Tigers, they're taking on the Cronulla Sharks. And honestly, I know it's at Leichhardt Oval. It should be packed. The Tigers weren't awful against the Raiders. I think a lot of people are still underestimating the Canberra Raiders, including me, because I did tip the Warriors. But I am going to tip the Sharks. I'd probably be tipping the Sharks against most teams, because if I'm being brutally honest, I think the Cronulla Sharks may just be the best looking team so far in this competition. They were able to weather the storm against the Warriors. They managed to keep a Bulldogs team that was looking red hot compared to their usual self to only 6 points. And they're still able to produce tries just thanks to such incredible players that they've got, despite Trindle and Nico Hines still not looking and combining the best. So I'm going to take the Cronulla Sharks in this one. I'm going to back the Tigers like the Dragons not to do 13 plus at Leichhardt Oval. I think they'll be up for it, especially with Benji's first game at Leichhardt Oval as a head coach. That could be a mistake once again, but I like to think the Tigers can make a game of it. So I'm going to take the Sharks just 1-12, and Ronaldo Mulatalo does look on fire. So I'd be wrong if I didn't tip him for my anytime try scorer. Here we go again, Manly and Para, primetime Sunday Arvo. I mean, Channel 9 have such a good lineup this week. It is at Parramatta, and the Eels are favourites, which may surprise some. I think if this game was at Brookie, it'd be the opposite. But the Eels did look good in defeat to the Penrith Panthers last week. Manly have had 2 very good wins to start the season. But we all know Manly's depth isn't the best, and it's starting to get tested very early, which is quite concerning. While the Eels, they're nearly at full strength besides Mike Acevo. So this game, I think it's going to be incredibly close. In saying that, these games always get built up, and it just feels like one team is always way up for it than the other. So while it's a game I always think is going to be close, it always does seem to end pretty convincing to one team. Going into this team on paper, I think a lot of people will give the edge to the Eels forward pack as a potential deciding factor. But after what I saw from Manly's forwards due to the Roosters team, which you could argue has as good, if not better, forward pack than the Eels themselves. So I think if Manly's forwards and Paseka and Aloiai can replicate what they just did against the likes of Ria Hargroves and Lindsay Collins up against RCG and Junior Bolo, then I think they could get the win. I'm interested to see if Brad Arthur maybe will start Junior Bolo for this game. Gutho and Turbo always seems to be a great matchup considering their history, so it always feels like whichever one of them can outplay the other one tends to win this footy game, so there's no reason for me not to tip them, so I am, of course, going to tip Manly as they are my team. I think if the Eels' power game is too much to handle, then I think Moses and Brown could have a field day off the back of it. But I think as long as Manly's forward pack can match them, if not do what they did against the Roosters, then I could easily see this being a Manly ambush in Parramatta. But for the sake of me not sounding too biased, and the fact the Eels have looked really good in the first 2 rounds, I am going to tip Manly 1-12. And for an anytime try scorer, tell me the last time Turbo didn't score 3 games in a row. So I'd be an idiot if I didn't go Tommy Turbo. The Christian Welsh Cup, the final game, the Newcastle Knights, they are desperate for a win, whereas the Melbourne Storm have got 2 gritty wins over 2 premiership contenders. So this game is a big flip of the coin. There is a chance the Newcastle Knights could easily upset the Melbourne Storm, and I think a lot of people will go there, and if you're not considering that a possibility, then I have no idea what planet you're living on. That was the turning point for the Knights last year, and I think that Adam O'Brien can get so much motivation out of them, not just the fact that they're 0-2 to start what should be, and what was, at least for most of the preseason, a season where the Newcastle Knights fans had a lot of hope. In saying that though, it doesn't matter what Melbourne Storm team it is, they really fall to an ambush, and yeah, this is just a case of I've seen what I've seen, and I just wouldn't feel comfortable tipping the Newcastle Knights to get an upset after what I've seen from the Melbourne Storm. So I'm going to take the Storm. I'm going to take them 1-12 because again, I back Newcastle to make a very good game out of this one. They could be in big trouble now that Hughes is out. The Newcastle Knights win is definitely on the table, so I'll go Storm 1-12, and for an anytime try scorer, Remus Smith gave the pass to Xavier Coates last week, but I think he can crash over this week. So let's hope your boy can go 8 for 8 this time. I've got Penrith 1-12 over the Broncos, the Warriors 1-12 over the Raiders, the Roosters 1-12 over the Bunnies, the Bulldogs 13+, the Cowboys 1-12 over the Dragons, the Sharks 1-12 over the Tigers, Manly 1-12 in Parramatta, and the Melbourne Storm 1-12 in Newcastle. Ladies and gentlemen, let me know, have I backed too many teams to go 1-12 when 13+ looks like such a juicy option? Smash that like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.